Hello and welcome to the Chris Wolf Podcast on iCode Media. Today I'm going to have a overview of the 2022 MIPS guide. Specifically, the reason that I'm going to do this is because in the past, for smaller offices, and that's mostly what I work with, is offices that are 15 providers or less. For smaller offices, there was often a challenge to know when you should use MIPS or when you should try to submit information to MIPS. And with the inflationary rates as they are, any amount of benefit that you can add to your practice while not having to expend a ton of extra resources, I think can be pretty beneficial to most small practices that are submitting to Medicare. And there's been some exclusions in 2022 that allow MIPS achievement for smaller practices to be much more probable and possible, so that you are getting the elevated payment, the increased payment, as opposed to a decreased payment. So I want to cover this with you so you can start to consider and think maybe there's still enough time left in 2022 to make some of these adjustments and changes. Today I want to talk about the MyDay multifocal for just a second. It has been a really great thing in our practice for our patients who are presbyopes of all areas, but those tricky presbyopes are always the ones that are kind of emerging, where they don't want to give up any of their faraway vision, but they're having some struggles up close. And so what the MyDay multifocal has been able to do for us is to allow those patients to transition into a multifocal more easily. And then as we have those patients progress into other levels where they need more ad powers, it's been a nice smooth transition. So the ultimate hurdle that we've seen in our practice before the MyDay multifocal was that we'd have patients who would resist any transition to a multifocal lens because of that distance blur. We just haven't seen that. So if you haven't started using MyDay multifocal in your practice, I would encourage you to start, check it out, reach out to your Cooper reps for those trial lenses, and commit to MyDay multifocal for your patients. I think they're going to like it. If you haven't checked out MacuHealth yet for your patients in Category 1 through Category 4, I think there's a lot of evidence that you should be considering. The first is, if we just look at AREDS 2 and what they talk about, MacuHealth is, so for patients in Category 3 and Category 4 AMD, MacuHealth is a great option for them that follows that entire protocol, and it also adds mesozeaxanthine to the mix, which, if you look at some of the evidence, I believe shows me that it's going to thicken the macular pigment better than without mesozeaxanthine. It also uses the correct AREDS 2 dose of zinc at 25 milligrams, and so you don't have to worry so much about the potential side effects of zinc. The other thing to think about, and it's beyond the scope of this, although you've probably heard me talk on other podcasts, is that in patients in Category 1 and 2, there may be some additional benefit to supplementing them with something that may be a little bit less than the AREDS 2, so you don't have to add as much to it. And that's where I use the MacuHealth LMZ3. And so I think if you haven't done this yet, I'd consider MacuHealth in your practice and for your patients. And it's been great for my patients, and we really feel like we can have the ability to help those patients in all categories of macular degeneration. I'll start out by saying that the AOA has provided a pretty great guide for this, and so that's something that if you wanted a written version of this, I'm not going to recreate that. You can use their written version. I'll put a link in the show notes today. The other thing to know is that right off the bat, your requirement to submit to MIPS or face a pay reduction is the same as it's been in the previous years. Essentially, what happens is there's three things that allow you to have an exclusion. So I'll flip this the other way and say that you are required to report. If you do not want the option of the reduction in payment that can come, which again is close to 10% reduction, there can also be close to a 10% increase if you participate in MIPS. And that's really where it starts to make a difference. So imagine that you're submitting less than the low volume threshold. Let's say you're submitting about $89,000 a year to Medicare, and you get a reduction of, or you could get an increase by opting in to MIPS you could get an increase of almost 10%. That's a $9,000 increase in payment, essentially, very close to it, in payments from Medicare on that year. And that becomes more important over years. But again, that can help offset some of the costs. And I'll tell you that if you have a up-to-date EHR, I suspect, and the EHRs that I am familiar with, they have a process that's not too difficult to attain some of the things that we're going to talk about here. So first thing I want to talk about is where you can have exclusions, or who must report to MIPS or suffer a payment reduction. So if you participate in Medicare, and obviously that's why you'd want to submit to MIPS, is that your Medicare billings must be more than $90,000, and you must see more than 200 Medicare patients in total, or collectively provide more than 200 covered services to Medicare beneficiaries over the course of a year. And so essentially your thought process should be, first, am I over those thresholds? Am I going to, in my practice, am I going to submit $90,000 or more to Medicare in 2022? And I'm going to provide care to more than 200 Medicare patients and see more than 200 services for those beneficiaries. If the answer is yes to all three, then you don't have a choice unless you want to choose to have a payment reduction. You do need to submit to MIPS. However, you can have exclusions. And so in the past, most of the time, because inflation wasn't huge and many practices weren't submitting a lot of dollars to Medicare, there's a whole number of doctors that were right under that low volume threshold, meaning that they weren't submitting $90,000 to Medicare, or providing care for 200 patients, or providing less than 200 professional services in that course of a year. So they would have met the low volume threshold. And in order to achieve all the things required for MIPS, most of the time those practices didn't think it was worth it. So here, what I want to talk about is where it might be worth it. So again, if you are billing maybe less than $90,000, but where it starts to become something significant, maybe $70,000 for you is significant, $80,000, where a 10% bonus could actually start to move the needle a little bit for you. If that is you, then you might want to opt in to submission. So when you opt in for submission, when you are not required to submit for MIPS, you have the option to what they call opt in, and that will allow for a payment increase or a payment reduction or a neutral payment. And so obviously you would only want to opt in if you know you're going to meet these requirements. And so the big caveat that I want to point out, and we're going to touch on this again, is that one of the most cumbersome things for most independent practitioners or smaller provider pools that was really hindering for them to integrate the technology needed to satisfy all of the things for MIPS was what's called promoting interoperability. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can do interoperability by submitting information back and forth through secure portals to other referral sources, so doctors that you might be referring to or doctors that might be referring to you. However, in order to make that meaningful interoperability, there is quite a few challenges and logistical things that need to be ironed out within some additional resources for most EHRs that add cost. So in the past, that additive cost may have been, again, sort of prohibitive for people to want to opt in. Well, this year, what they're allowing is if you are a practice pool, so for 2022, if your practice has 15 or fewer providers, whether you meet the low volume threshold or do not meet the low volume threshold, if you have fewer than 15, then you do not have to use the promoting interoperability measures in order to get your total MIPS score. And so instead of having 4 weighted performance categories, you've got 3. improvement activities, quality, and cost. And so the thing that you can mostly control in your practice is going to be your improvement activities and your quality. And I'll tell you, for improvement activities, if you're a member of the AOA, you're probably you can probably check mark at least one of those. If you have an EHR that has a portal for your patients, you can check mark the other. And so you're probably achieving improvement activities. And then it comes down to quality. Quality, again, is something that you can control. And most of the quality comes in from provisional reporting of specific data related to glaucoma patients, diabetes patients. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. So big picture is, and then cost is something that they take that is just purely based on your submission. So they look at the cost of your care, and then they average that cost or compare that cost to other providers, and give you a score for that cost. So essentially, I want to focus on those three. Promoting interoperability. If you are a group of more than 15, you probably have an infrastructure in place already to do that if you're going to participate with MIPS in order to minimize any pay reduction or maximize any pay increase. This is not really for your office if you have more than 15 providers. For your office, we're going to focus on why you would want, what you're going to do if you decide that you want to try to either opt in or mandatorily report for your MIPS final score. Alrighty. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is quality. And in order for quality to be considered, you want to try to report on 100% of your patients during the entire calendar year. What's required is 70% of your patients, but really they're recommending 100. And I think from a practical standpoint, it is easiest to try to approach just every patient that you see. This is not just Medicare patients. It is also patients that have any other payers associated to them, because it's going to aggregate data from your EHR associated with all your payments or all your patients. Alrighty, so when we think about quality, that's 30% of your total score. So if you're thinking about quality, 6 quality measurements are needed. So you want to pick 6. And then if you look at those 6, essentially they're going to come down into a few buckets. And most practices are going to look at reporting factors for primary open-angle glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy and communication of that diabetic retinopathy, a diabetes eye exam, that's number 3, most patients. They may also add another one for glaucoma in terms of reduction of intraocular pressure, that's 4. And then you can think about other screening measures. So some might look at high-risk medications in older adults, blood pressure, and then tobacco cessation. Those 3, you're going to usually pick 2 of those 3 to round out your 6 reporting categories. The bottom line is that your EHR probably has a set of all of these, or a set of specific ones that you can follow specific steps to achieve each one of these. And they ought to, based on the diagnosis code, be auto-triggered. And most of the EHRs, again, that I've worked with, they will auto-trigger based on diagnosis code. And then, again, you have to make sure that you're clicking buttons in the correct way. That stinks. I know. I'm just the messenger. I'm not the purveyor of this entity. But yes, you do have to usually click boxes in specific ways. But once you figure that out, I'll tell you that once you figure out exactly the steps that you need to do to meet those 6 criteria that you decide you're going to meet, then the quality stuff is usually pretty easy. Like you'll probably, if you follow that pattern or your scribes follow that pattern, you'll find that you're hitting 100%. Your numerator and your denominator are going to wind up being very close to 100%. As far as cost is concerned, that's another 30%. Again, we're going to miss a certain portion of this because of your promoting interoperability, but that just means that that promoting interoperability will be spread across these other 3. So essentially, your 30% of your MIPS score is due to cost, and it's an attempt to measure how much you cost, your practice costs Medicare to provide care to patients. And there's really nothing for you to submit when that score is analyzed. It's derived from calculators based on your claims, as I said before, and certain conditions that you are also coding and reporting when you are putting those codes. And this is pretty vague, but it would make the case that if you had a patient that has multiple conditions, when we think about the complexity of a patient, if one provider bills $100 for a 92014 and another provider bills $50 for a 92014. I mean, I know it's not what I'm recommending, but the point is that imagine those two provider pools, and both of the diagnosis codes were cataracts for each one of those patients and each one of those providers, and that was the only code that was used for that bill that was put on the CMS 1500 form and that was submitted to Medicare. If that was the only code, then Medicare wouldn't have any idea that the differences in care that may have been provided to each one of those patients. All they got to see was what was the diagnosis, what was the CPT code, how much did I pay for that CPT code. However, if this patient, if provider A that charged $100 and was also monitoring for that comprehensive eye exam, and was also monitoring the patient as a glaucoma suspect, because that patient, in fact, was a glaucoma suspect, and also monitoring that patient's ocular surface disease as well as their cataracts. And they reported that by marking, including the diagnosis code for cataracts and dry eye and glaucoma suspect, low risk or high risk, as much specificity as they can. Now, all of a sudden, CMS may be able to tease out the data why there might be a difference. Now, the fee for the service will probably be the same, but they could actually then say, well, maybe Dr. A is providing, even though they cost more, maybe providing care that is more comprehensive or more detailed than provider B, who is charging us less, but only linking one code with that specific CPT code, one ICD code with that CPT code. So the bottom line is that that they can scale that based on the complexity of the case that they are seeing in the numbers that you're reporting with diagnosis codes along with the CPT codes. Now, so that's cost. So we've covered quality, we've covered cost. We're going to talk about improvement activities. And again, this is going to be it's kind of round out for smaller practices. It's going to round out the score that you have. Now, there are, for small practices, you need to select what they call one highly weighted improvement activity or two medium weighted improvement activities. So if we're going to talk about a highly rated improvement activity, there are two of those. One is called engagement of new Medicaid patients and follow-up. And so essentially what you're doing is seeing how new and follow-up Medicaid patients in a timely manner, and you're including individuals duly eligible for Medicaid and Medicare, and then they're qualifying a timely manner as 10 business days. So again, I think this might be a little bit more challenging for most people to track. I would advocate that you would select two, and I'll talk about those two medium performance indicators that you might want to consider. The other high one in a second. The other high one that you want to think about would be collection and follow-up of patient experience and satisfaction data on beneficiary engagement. So what this means is you're collecting and following up with patients' experience and satisfaction data on beneficiary engagement, including development of an improvement plan. So one of the things that you could consider would be, well, do you reach out to your patients and ask them about their satisfaction with your services? Do you encourage people to give you different reviews? Do they score you? Well, if they do, you could utilize those scores and then have a plan to try to improve those scores. So let's say you analyze your reviews of the last 6 months, and part of that analysis finds that you're taking too long. One of the common themes that patients may report would be that they're spending too much time waiting for an appointment. And so one of the things that you might do to remedy that is to put plans in place to shorten wait times for appointments, both in the office and then, after, when a patient needs care, how long it's taking them to get in. So you might actually have a brief written plan on how you're going to address the patients who need an appointment at a more timely fashion. Then there's these other mediums. So again, you might select one of those two that might satisfy it. Then you have these kind of medium weight. And so again, if you're a small practice, you only need two of these medium weights. So either one of the high weighted that I just mentioned or two of the medium weighted. Now, one is comprehensive eye exams. And so in this case, what you're doing is you're essentially promoting the importance of a comprehensive eye exam, which may be accomplished by any one or more of the following. And then they go about a number of things. One of them is different campaigns. So Think About Your Eyes campaign is specifically referred to by the AOA documents, or allowing patients to have access to other resources that discuss no-cost eye exams. So essentially, you're finding areas to promote comprehensive eye health, and that is an improvement activity. And then the other one that I think that most of us, if we have EHRs, probably have access to is a patient portal. So essentially, do you provide access to patients through a patient portal that allows that patient to engage in a bi-directional information exchange? So let's say that there's a website that can be linked through your website that allows a patient to log in and access their charts. One of the advantages from a practice standpoint is some patients like to have their records. So you're sitting there trying to print them off, getting records releases, etc. You don't have to do that anymore. You basically can refer that patient to their portal, and you can give them their access through their normal. One thing I always say is make it easy. If they need to create a username and password, maybe your username is automatically created through your EHR. May take a few seconds to copy their existing email address, and then hit a random generator for the password. You could write the password down along with the web address using a QR code, or they can type the web address in, and all it says is your username. So to protect HIPAA, your username is the email that you gave us before. Your password is this, right? You write your password down. And so you're not putting both on the same document. And now all of a sudden you've satisfied your engagement of patients through that patient portal. So I think those are probably the most common two things that will be super easy for you to integrate in your practice, and can achieve this level of improvement activities for 2022. So, and then again, we're not going to talk about improving interoperability, because the logistics of that for a smaller group of docs is typically more challenging to do because of the infrastructure required. So in summary, you should consider submitting to MIPS. Whether you're required to or opting in, you should consider whether or not that dollar value raise that you're going to get in 2023 is worth the efforts of the things you're already doing within your EHR. When I work with practices to do this, I find that within maybe an hour of our sitting down and kind of sorting through what's required with their EHR, we can find processes that they're already either achieving most of these things, or they can refine pretty quickly to amplify and hit their quality payments and their increase in MIPS score. So again, think about your quality, think about your improvement, and think about your cost and how reporting other things can impact your cost. And then remember that even if you're not required to do it, you may decide to submit for MIPS because of the ability to increase payment with your low volume threshold. With that, I will put the links in today's show notes. They are good resources. I still think there's time for most practices to go through and see if they can achieve this. I think it probably would be worth your time, especially if you're not hitting your low volume thresholds. And with that, have a great week. We'll talk to you on the next one.